We now come to the statement. I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to make his statement. Chancellor.
Mr Speaker, thank you for granting me permission to make this statement to the House today. Earlier this week, the Prime Minister set out the next stage of the government's health response to coronavirus. Today, I want to explain the next phase of our planned economic response. The House will be reassured to know I've been developing plans to protect jobs and the economy over the winter period. Plans that seek to strike the finely judged balance between managing the virus and protecting the jobs and livelihoods of millions. Mr Speaker, I know people are anxious and afraid and exhausted at the prospect of further restrictions on our economic and social freedoms. I share those feelings, but there are reasons to be cautiously optimistic. We are in a fundamentally different position than we were in March, and we now know much more about this virus. Public awareness of the risks and how to mitigate them is far greater. And we have met our promise to give the NHS whatever it needs, with significant new funding for NHS capacity, for PPE, and I can inform the House today we have now provided over £12 billion for test and trace. In economic terms, while our output remains well below where it was in February, we have seen 3 consecutive months of growth, and millions of people have moved off the furlough and back to work. But the resurgence of the virus and the measures we need to take in response pose a threat to this fragile economic recovery. So our task now is to move to the next stage of our economic plan, nurturing the recovery by protecting jobs through the difficult winter months. Mr Speaker, the underlying rationale for the next phase of economic support must be different to what came before. The primary goal of our economic policy remains unchanged: to support people's jobs. But the way we achieve that must evolve. Back in March, we hoped we were facing a temporary period of disruption. In response, we provided one of the most generous and comprehensive economic plans anywhere in the world, with £190 billion of support for people, businesses and public services as we protected our economic capacity. It is now clear, as the Prime Minister and our scientific advisors have said, for at least the next 6 months, the virus and restrictions are going to be a fact of our lives. Our economy is now likely to undergo a more permanent adjustment. The sources of our economic growth and the kinds of jobs we create will adapt and evolve to the new normal. And our plan needs to adapt and evolve in response. Above all, we need to face up to the trade-offs and hard choices coronavirus presents. And Mr Speaker, there has been no harder choice than the decision to end the furlough scheme. The furlough was the right policy at the time we introduced it. It provided immediate short-term protection for millions of jobs through a period of acute crisis. But as the economy reopens, it is fundamentally wrong to hold people in jobs that only exist inside the furlough. We need to create new opportunities and allow the economy to move forward. And that means supporting people to be in viable jobs which provide genuine security. As I've said throughout this crisis, I cannot save every business. I cannot save every job. No Chancellor could. But what we can and must do is deal with the real problems businesses and employees are facing now. In March, the problem was that we ordered businesses to close. In response, we paid people to stay at home and not work. Today, the problem is different. Many businesses are operating safely and viably, but they now face uncertainty and reduced demand over the winter months. What those businesses need is support to bring people back to work and protect as many viable jobs as we can. To do that, I'm announcing today the new Jobs Support Scheme. The government will directly support the wages of people in work, giving businesses who face depressed demand the option of keeping employees in a job on shorter hours rather than making them redundant. The Job Support Scheme is built on 3 principles. First, it will support viable jobs. To make sure of that, employees must work at least a third of their normal hours and be paid for that work as normal by their employer. The government, together with employers, will then increase those people's wages, covering 2/3 of the pay they have lost by reducing their working hours. And the employee will keep their job. Second, we will target support at firms who need it the most. All small and medium-sized businesses are eligible, but larger businesses only when their turnover has fallen through the crisis. Third, it will be open to employers across the United Kingdom, even if they have not previously used the furlough scheme. The scheme will run for 6 months, starting in November. And employers retaining furloughed staff on shorter hours can claim both the Job Support Scheme and the Jobs Retention Bonus. Mr. Speaker, throughout this crisis, we have sought parity between employees and the self-employed, providing more than £13 billion of support to over 2.6 million self-employed small businesses. So I am extending the existing self-employed grant on similar terms and conditions as the new Jobs Support Scheme. Mr. Speaker, these are radical interventions in the UK labour market, policies we have never tried in this country before. Together with the Jobs Retention Bonus, the Kickstart Scheme for young people, tens of billions of pounds of job creation schemes, new investment in training and apprenticeships, we are protecting millions of jobs and businesses. Mr. Speaker, if we want to protect jobs this winter, the second major challenge is helping businesses with cash flow. Over the last 6 months, we've supported business with tens of billions of pounds of tax deferrals and generous government-backed loans. Those policies have been a lifeline. But right now, businesses need every extra pound to protect jobs rather than repaying loans and tax deferrals. So I'm taking 4 further steps today to make that happen. First, bounce-back loans have given over 1 million small businesses a £38 billion boost to survive this pandemic. To give those businesses more time and greater flexibility to repay their loans, we are introducing Pay As You Grow. This means loans can now be extended from 6 to 10 years, nearly halving the average monthly repayment. Businesses who are struggling can now choose to make interest-only payments, and anyone in real trouble can apply to suspend repayments altogether for up to 6 months. No business taking up Pay As You Grow will see their credit rating affected as a result. Second, I am also changing the terms of our other loan schemes. More than 60,000 small and medium-sized businesses have now taken out coronavirus business interruption loans. To help them, I plan to extend the government guarantee on these loans for up to 10 years, making it easier for lenders to give more people more time to repay. I am also extending the deadline of all our loan schemes to the end of this year. And we are starting work on a new successor loan guarantee programme set to begin in January. Third, I want to give businesses more time and flexibility over their deferred tax bills. Nearly 500,000 businesses deferred more than £30 billion of VAT this year. On current plans, those payments fall due in March. Instead, I will allow businesses to spread that VAT bill over 11 smaller repayments with no interest to pay. And any of the millions of self-assessed income taxpayers who need extra help can also now extend their outstanding tax bill over 12 months from next January. The final step I'm taking today will support two of the most affected sectors, hospitality and tourism. On current plans, their VAT rates will increase from 5% back to the standard rate of 20% on January the 13th. So to support more than 150,000 businesses and help protect 2.4 million jobs through the winter, I'm announcing today that we are cancelling the planned increase and will keep the lower 5% VAT rate until March the 31st next year. Mr. Speaker, today's measures mark an important evolution in our approach. Our lives can no longer be put on hold. Since May, we have taken steps to liberate our economy and society. We did these things because life means more than simply existing. We find meaning and hope through our friends and family, through our work, through our community. People were not wrong for wanting that meaning, for striving towards normality, and nor was the government wrong to want this for them. I said in the summer that we must endure and live with the uncertainty of the moment. This means learning our new limits as we go. Because the truth is, the responsibility for defeating coronavirus cannot be held by government alone. It is a collective responsibility shared by all, because the cost is paid by all. We have so often spoken about this virus in terms of lives lost. But the price our country is paying is wider than that. The government has done much to mitigate the effects of these awful trade-offs between health, education, and employment. And as we think about the next few weeks and months, we need to bear all of those costs in mind. As such, it would be dishonest to say there is now some risk-free solution, or that we can mandate behaviour to such an extent we lose any sense of personal responsibility. What was true at the beginning of this crisis remains true now. It's on all of us, and we must learn to live with it and live without fear. I commend this statement to the House.
Just to say, I recognise the importance of this statement, and quite rightly, you need a little more time. And just to show that, I'll ensure that the other two, not only the Shadow Chancellor, but the spokesperson as well, will have some extra time as well. Shadow Chancellor Annalise Dodds. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Chancellor for his statement and for advance sight of this announcement. Mr. Speaker, I've called for the introduction of a system of targeted wage support 40 times. That call has been rebuffed by this government 20 times. It's a relief this government have U-turned now. But we must be open and honest. That delay in introducing this new scheme will have impacted on businesses' confidence. I know that from talking to them, and I'm sure members on the opposite benches know that from talking to businesses in their constituencies. The deadline for redundancy consultations by large firms before the end of the furlough scheme came and went last week without a word from this government. Now, if the package of measures announced today can help people keep their jobs and can help businesses through hard times, then Labour will, of course, support it. And there's much in this statement that we do support. As I've just said, we've repeatedly called for a system of targeted wage support, and we've repeatedly called for help for indebted, cash-strapped businesses over and over again. But we must ensure these measures are as effective as possible at keeping workers in employment, getting unemployed people back into work and keeping viable businesses in operation. Now, as with many previous announcements by this government, we must wait for the detail to be revealed, presumably following the press conference scheduled for later on today. But workers and businesses are hanging on the Chancellor's every word right now, and they need to know what's promised here. So can the Chancellor be clear? Will this scheme of wage supports actually keep more people in work? Because for that to happen, the scheme must make it more attractive for employers to retain more staff on reduced hours than to retain some full-time and make others redundant. So does his scheme actually incentivise short hours working? What conditions, if any, will be applied to ensure value for public money? Will the scheme require commitments for continuing employment, unlike the existing furlough scheme where there have been abuses? And will it require those participating to provide decent, sustainable work? Will the scheme incentivise training and retraining? The German scheme does, and Labour's called for a UK version to include incentives for training, but that's missing here. Indeed, while, as I said, we welcome many of the elements the Chancellor has announced today, the lack of action on training and skills is worrying. I was waiting and waiting for the Chancellor to talk about training. He mentioned the word once in passing. That's not enough. His government has already allocated funding for a national skills strategy, but it's not being delivered on the ground. So when will the Chancellor get serious about training so people can be ready for the jobs of the future? He mentioned the fact our economy is changing. Let's make sure that our population is ready for that change. Now, Labour has called repeatedly for continued targeted support for the self-employed, so I'm pleased that's referred to here. But will these measures avoid the gaps in coverage that have bedevilled existing schemes? And why is there no forward plan here for the needs of those who are extremely clinically vulnerable to this disease? Relatedly, will the Chancellor do more to demand his colleagues get a grip on the UK's public health crisis? Because our country is suffering from a double tragedy: the highest excess death rate in Europe and the deepest recession in the G7. Labour supports the government in its announcement of additional restrictions this week. The government's messaging has been confused enough already. The last thing we want to do is add to that confusion. But we are concerned that these restrictions have only been necessary because of continuing problems with test, trace and isolate. Now, the Chancellor referred to the money that has been put into test, trace and isolate. As I said earlier this week, enormous sums have been devoted to that task, but those sums are not delivering the system that we need. We are still not at the stage of many other countries. The Chancellor must work on this as well as his other colleagues in government. Now, finally, before the summer recess, Labour called for a back-to-work budget focused on jobs, jobs, jobs. We didn't get one. We expected a budget this autumn. It appears again we're not getting one, and that's despite the challenges this poses for devolved governments, and despite the fact the government's actually referred to provisions in a future finance bill as necessary for its approach to Brexit. The Chancellor only announced he'd make a statement to Parliament today after I'd called for him to come here with an urgent question, and I'm very grateful to Mr Speaker for granting that. Now, this government has lagged behind on test, trace and isolate. It's lagged behind on wage support. It's lagged behind on support for those having to self-isolate. It's lagging behind on green investment. And for these and for other reasons, it looks like our recovery will be lagging behind that of many other countries. So finally, when will the Chancellor provide the back-to-work budget this country needs? Thank you.
Chancellor, the Exchequer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member opposite for her comments. On the question of continued support for jobs, however, I would have hoped that she would have welcomed strongly today's measures, if for no other reason that she has previously asked for something similar. However, her position on this matter has been somewhat changeable, Mr Speaker. At different points in the last few weeks and months, She has said that furlough shouldn't go on forever, and then changed her mind and said we should extend it. And then she changed her mind and said it should be replaced. And then only yesterday, the Leader of the Opposition said it should be extended again. That's not the kind of certainty that British businesses or British workers need. But to address the specific questions, Mr. Speaker, this scheme absolutely does incentivise shorter time working. The company will pay its workers for the time that they are in work, and the government and the employer jointly will subsidise the time of the worker is not working. The conditions will be set out in guidance, which will be published shortly, and then over the next few weeks, the further details will be worked through with businesses and unions, as we did with the furlough scheme. In terms of conditionality, I can reassure the Honourable Lady opposite, the new scheme does indeed have the conditionality that is appropriate for this stage of our response. Notably, this scheme will only be available for larger companies who are seeing an actual decline in their revenues as a result of coronavirus, ensuring that our support is targeted where it is most needed. Similarly, there will be restrictions on larger companies in terms of capital distributions to shareholders whilst they are in receipt of money for their workers on this scheme. And indeed, they will not be able to make redundancy notices to those workers who are on this scheme throughout its duration. On training, I would just say to the Honourable Member opposite, we have increased training both for post-16 at the budget and indeed in the recent plan for jobs, providing increased access for school leavers to access level 2 qualifications across the board. And notably, one of the hallmarks of our skills system is our successful apprenticeship programme. And what we announced in July was a significant increase in the incentive payment to businesses for taking on a new apprentice. £2,000 cash incentive to businesses to take on an apprentice and provide that valuable in-work training that we know makes such a difference to young people's futures. So we are committed to providing especially our young people with the opportunities that they need to succeed in the future. The Honourable Lady opposite talked about jobs. Mr. Speaker, in July we outlined a £30 billion plan for jobs to support, create and protect jobs across every part of our United Kingdom. Chief among the initiatives was the Kickstart scheme, where right now employers, small, medium and large, are rushing to put in applications to take on a young Kickstarter to start later this autumn and provide them with the opportunities that they need at an incredibly difficult time. And I can assure this House and the country my number one economic priority is to protect people's jobs. And that's what this government will continue to do. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the opposition wanted the furlough extended, but they never said for how long. Then they wanted the furlough replaced, but they wouldn't say what with. Then they wanted the furlough targeted, but they wouldn't say to who. I do stand ready to work with the Honourable Member opposite if she knew exactly what she wanted. Today, the government stands with the British people and British business, with the CBI, with the British Chambers of Commerce, with the Trades Union Congress in bringing much needed support to the economy. Very good. Yesterday, the Leader of the Opposition called for a Plan B for the economy. Mr. Speaker, the party opposite don't even have a Plan A.
We're now heading to the Chair of the Select Committee in the South West with Mel Stride. Mel Stride.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The devil, of course, will be in the detail, but from what I've heard of this statement, Mr. Speaker, can I broadly and warmly welcome it? I'm encouraged by the job support scheme, the fact that it's targeted, which is something that I and my committee have been calling for some time. I'm encouraged by the announcement on loans, the pay-as-you-grow scheme, particularly to help small and medium-sized enterprises, and I'm encouraged that the self-employed will have their scheme extended. But my right honourable friend will know that there was very considerable concern under the existing arrangements that many self-employed people fell through the gaps of the support provided. And could my right honourable friend say something about whether some of those gaps that have occurred in the past will be ameliorated or ironed out as a consequence of the new measures to come forward? And would he meet me in fairly short order to discuss the options that might be available?
Chancellor?
Mr. Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend for his comments, and I'm sure he will see in much of what we've announced today some of the thinking in his latest report. So I thank him and his committee members for all the input that they have provided in helping us think about the next phase of our economic response. And he's right, this package focuses on employment and indeed in supporting businesses with their cash flow. With regard to the self-employed, I'm glad he welcomes the extension in the existing support grant. This is something that virtually no other country in the world has done, and it comes on top of the most generous support to our self-employed out of almost any country throughout their response to this crisis. And especially, of course, I'll be happy to meet with him, but I know he will also be pleased to learn that the measures today to defer income tax self-assessment will be of particular importance to our self-employed small businesses.
SNP spokesperson Alison Thurlett.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And we in these benches are glad that the Chancellor has accepted the need to extend support, but he is coming very late in the day to do this, and it is little comfort to those who have already lost their jobs due to the impending ending of the furlough scheme. Industry, trade unions, the Treasury Select Committee, people across the country and cross-party members in this House have been pleading with him for months now, and it feels like it's only this latest spike that has prompted his action here today. Coronavirus, Mr Speaker, is not done with us yet. The furlough scheme has saved jobs, kept people paying their bills and their mortgages, and it has been incredibly important, and it is a shame that he is ending it at the end of next month. Hospitality, travel and tourism, aviation, exhibitions, culture and performing arts, and even travelling show people and a host of others cannot go back to normal work because his government has placed restrictions on their businesses. Those jobs, those businesses are viable, and it's not for him to decide the viability of businesses. Ending this scheme puts 61,000 Scottish jobs at risk. His measures on the pay-as-you-grow scheme recognise that many businesses have deferred payments and have mounting debt. However, the problem for many businesses, it's not income deferred, it's income lost completely. So will he go further and convert those loans to grants and to equity to give companies a bit more certainty about their future? We welcome the hospitality and tourism VAT cut, but will he reassess this in March and perhaps consider keeping it in place permanently to help those businesses pick up, hopefully, through an improved business next summer? There is nothing here, Mr Speaker, nothing whatsoever for those that have been excluded from existing support schemes. The freelancers, the Forgotten Limited, the PAYE, the new starters, the women in maternity, and all of those who have a not one penny piece from this government for 6 months. He cannot say he doesn't know this is a problem, although he still refuses to meet with them. How dare he say that these 3 million people should be left high and dry with nothing? Will he place further conditions to prevent unscrupulous employers exploiting the new scheme, such as BA and others have done? And will he support my colleague from Paisley and Renfrewshire North's Fire and Rehire Bill, which would prevent that exploitation in future? Mr Speaker, the Chancellor did not have the courtesy to lift the phone to the Cabinet Secretary for Finance in the Scottish Government, Kate Forbes, or her counterparts in Wales and Northern Ireland to let her know that he plans to scrap the autumn budget. They found out on Twitter, Mr Speaker. And it's not the first time that this government has had a lack of respect for the devolved institutions, because this happened last year too. Does he appreciate the very difficult situation he has created by this, and that with no access to the fiscal levers and no clarity on the funding settlement, he has tied both of Kate Forbes' hands behind his back? What does he intend to do about that?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mr Speaker, to the Honourable Lady's questions, I think she is continuing to ask for an extension of the furlough scheme, but fundamentally, I do not believe that would be the right thing to do. At this stage of the economic recovery, it is better that our support is targeted on and focused on supporting viable jobs in our economy, and that means a new approach. Extending the furlough and allowing people to be at home full-time is not the right approach at this phase of the economic crisis, and our new scheme will ensure that we do provide support to those who need it the most and protect as many viable jobs as possible in many, indeed, of the industries she mentioned. She asked about conditions. I agree with her. There should be conditions on larger companies accessing support from the government for wage protection. Indeed, there will be conditions both on capital redistributions, as I said, but also on the ability to provide redundancy notices to employees whilst they are on the scheme, and indeed, in the first place, limiting the eligibility for large companies to those that are most in need. And with regard to dialogue with the Scottish Government, I'm pleased to say that the Chief Secretary of Treasury speaks regularly with his counterparts, as indeed I believe he is doing very shortly. With regard to budgets, there is a well-worked process for how devolved nation budgets are set. There is absolutely no requirement for UK budget to be done beforehand, and indeed that was not the case earlier this spring. We will have OBR forecasts that come later this autumn, and on the basis of those forecasts, the normal work will be done with our counterparts in devolved authorities to ensure that they can set the budgets that they need.
Les Ross.
Very much, Mr Speaker. Over 900,000 Scottish jobs have been protected as a result of the UK Government's furlough scheme during the worst of this crisis. That's ensured over the last 6 months that Scottish families have continued, hundreds of thousands of these families have continued to maintain a regular income. And I welcome the further support announced by the UK Government today. Could the Chancellor of the Exchequer outline how these UK Government measures will benefit communities, businesses, individuals and families across Scotland as we enter this next difficult phase in our fight against coronavirus?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his question, and I'm also grateful to him for the conversations that he has had with both me and the Prime Minister in the importance of supporting every part of our United Kingdom as we go through this economic crisis and drive our recovery forward. That is something that this government will always take very seriously, and he has been very helpful and played a valuable role in ensuring that the measures we have put in place today will benefit companies and workers in every single part of our United Kingdom.
Charlotte Nichols.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Large parts of the North, including my constituency of Warrington North, are under extra restrictions but are not being given additional support from the Treasury, whether for our local authorities or our businesses. If this government's levelling up agenda is to mean anything, this must be urgently addressed. Today's statement is a significant change of direction from whatever it takes. So what extra measures will the Chancellor provide to constituencies like mine to ensure that we are not levelled down as a result of this pandemic?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mr Speaker, there is support in place through the NHS for local authorities for any response in areas of tightened restrictions, whether that's for community information, enhanced testing, and lately we outlined a self-isolation incentive payments of up to £500, and also a business grant support scheme for businesses that have been ordered to close. This government remains committed to levelling up in every part of our country, as outlined in our ambitious plans to invest in infrastructure in every part of our country.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Eat Out to Help Out scheme was a massive success in Ashfield, with 53,000 meals served. The scheme saved thousands of jobs and kept hundreds of businesses open. However, my wife is not happy with the Chancellor, because I put a stone on him weight during August, which meant I needed bigger clothes. But John Edwards, who owns the world-famous Junction Bar and restaurant, is very happy with the Chancellor. John tells me that without the Chancellor's support, his bar would have closed, and his staff, who are like a family to him, would have lost their jobs. So can I pass my thanks on to the Chancellor from every single pub and hospitality business in Ashfield for extending the 5% VAT cut until next March. John Edwards, Dame Margot and Donna at the Junction Pub will be very happy with this great news.
To the Exchequer.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and I'm glad our initiatives have made such a difference on the ground to people in his constituency, protecting jobs, as I'm sure they have elsewhere. I very much hope that I can come and visit with him, Jono and his team at the Junction Pub in the near future, and I wish them every support through the next few months, and hope that the measures that we've put in place today will continue to ensure that they can thrive in the future.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've called for targeted support for jobs in the aviation sector a number of times, a sector that is viable if not for the impact of coronavirus. But in my constituency of Luton South, EasyJet, TUI, Luton Airport have already been forced into making redundancies due to the lack of government support. So can the Chancellor explain why the government waited until a week after the deadline passed for consultation on large redundancies caused by the end of the coronavirus job retention scheme to announce its replacement?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, our response will continue to evolve as the circumstances demand. With respect to aviation, I have every sympathy for companies and employees in that sector. Obviously, they've been very hard hit. The measures that we've put in place have made a significant difference to businesses in that sector. And indeed, I think that one of the ones she mentioned, and indeed many others, have accessed some of our much larger loan schemes to provide vital liquidity at a very difficult time. And I know many businesses in the aerospace supply chain will particularly welcome the part-time working job support scheme we have announced today, as it will be particularly well suited for their manufacturing businesses today.
Peter Aldous.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Chancellor's statement. His stamp duty holiday, which is due to expire on the 31st of March, has been extremely successful in stimulating a very important part of the UK economy. What plans does he have for further housing initiatives which will not only generate business activity, but if properly focused, can also alleviate poverty and promote social mobility?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. He's absolutely right. The stamp duty cut is driving activity in the housing market, which is helping to protect jobs in that sector. I would point him to our Green Homes Grant, which the Department for Business are shortly to roll out, which will provide households with a grant of up to £5,000 to subsidise initiatives to improve the insulation and energy efficiency of their homes. There will be larger grants available for those households most in need, as determined by their local authorities, helping them not only to save on carbon emissions, but also up to £300 a year on their energy bills.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We talk about green industrial revolution and the Chancellor talks about job protection, yet just last week Scottish Yards missed out on the contracts for the Sea Green offshore wind project. So in terms of real job creation, will you consider the Scottish Government's plea for an £80 billion UK stimulus? Will confirm when the National Infrastructure Strategy and Energy White Paper will be published, and crucially, will instruct officials to look at how the CFD process works and change it so it incentivises the use of UK supply chains?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mr Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, the honourable member is absolutely right about the importance of offshore wind to our economy. It is something that we have a global strategic competitive advantage in. This government will continue to support that sector in the way that it has. I'm always open to new ideas about how to do that, but we must make sure that we double down on our advantage and drive jobs in every part of our country, not just in Scotland, but also in the North East, where we have considerable advantages over other countries, and not just in providing energy, but now manufacturing more of the content that goes into our turbines.
Jacob Young.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for his statement? Will he agree with me that as the coronavirus is now threatening our recovery, it is right that we focus our support on the problems that businesses in Redcar, Cleveland and elsewhere are facing right now? Support for viable businesses and viable jobs through a time of depressed demand due to the restriction that the virus threatens is exactly what the new job support scheme delivers.
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
My